I am Arthur. I am 32 years old, and for the last 10 years of my life, I allowed my own flesh and blood to treat me like a stain on the family name. While I was standing at the front door of my younger brother's lavish housewarming party, physically exhausted and holding a carefully chosen gift, his new fiancée looked me up and down, sneered at my worn-out jacket, and told me that deliveries go to the side door. She laughed, loud enough for the whole house to hear, joking that I looked homeless and was probably there to beg for money. And my parents? My parents stood right behind her and laughed along, telling me to stop being so sensitive and not to ruin the evening for their golden boy. But there is one massive detail they did not know. That incredible, high-paying corporate job the fiancée was loudly bragging about to all the guests? The elite company she claimed to practically run alongside the boss? I am the founder and CEO of that exact company. And right now, she is completely blacklisted from the industry, and my parents are drowning in a financial disaster of their own making. Before I tell you exactly how I tore her fake world apart and brought my family's house of cards crashing down, hit that like button if you believe that justice always catches up to arrogant people. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really began. Let me paint the picture for you. The exhaustion I felt standing on that pristine porch was not just the kind you get from missing a few hours of sleep. It was a physical weight, heavy and dragging, settling deep into the marrow of my bones. It was the cumulative, crushing fatigue of a 6-month corporate merger that had finally closed just 3 hours before I drove over. I had spent the better part of the week locked in a boardroom in New York, surrounded by lawyers and executives, hammering out the final details of a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I had barely eaten. I was running on stale black coffee and pure adrenaline. When the ink finally dried on those contracts, all I wanted to do was go home. And by home, I mean my actual home. The penthouse apartment downtown with the floor-to-ceiling windows, the silent air conditioning, and the peace I had worked a decade to afford. I should have ordered takeout from that high-end sushi place that charges ridiculous prices, drawn a hot shower, and slept for 14 solid hours. But I could not do that. Today was Julian's housewarming party. Julian is my younger brother. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I was pulling into the neighborhood. It was a text from my father, Richard. The text read, "Everyone is already here. Try not to look like you just rolled out of bed, Arthur. Julian has important friends coming." I just stared at the screen, letting the backlight sting my dry eyes. Important friends. The irony of that statement was sharp enough to cut glass, but I swallowed it down the exact same way I had swallowed every slight, every insult, and every dismissal from them for the last decade. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of my beat-up 2014 Honda Civic. My dad was not entirely wrong. I looked completely wrecked. My hair was a mess. I was wearing an old, faded zip-up hoodie over a t-shirt because I had spilled coffee on my dress shirt during a frantic meeting with my legal team that morning. I had dark circles under my eyes that made me look hollow. I looked like a man who was severely struggling to make ends meet. I looked like a guy who was one bad month away from losing everything. And the twisted reality is that was exactly how my family preferred to see me. They needed me to be the failure so Julian could shine even brighter. I turned off the ignition, and the old Honda shuddered into silence. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could hear the loud, generic pop music thumping from the backyard of the house. I could hear the laughter. I took a deep breath, grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, and stepped out onto the driveway. I just needed to survive 3 hours. 3 hours of smiling, nodding, congratulating my brother, avoiding an argument with my dad about my supposed lack of direction in life, and then I could leave and go back to the empire I had built in secret. I walked up to the heavy oak front door and rang the doorbell. It swung open almost immediately, but it was not Julian standing there. It was not my mother, Eleanor, or my father. It was a woman I had never met in person, though I recognized her heavily filtered face from Julian's social media. This was Chloe, his fiancée. She was stunning in a very manufactured, expensive way. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her makeup was flawless. and she was wearing a designer dress that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent. She held a flute of champagne in one hand, her manicured nails tapping against the glass. She looked at me. Her eyes traveled from my scuffed sneakers, up my faded jeans, paused at the worn-out hoodie, and finally landed on my tired face. She did not smile. She did not say hello. Instead, she turned her head slightly over her shoulder, shouting back into the grand foyer, her voice pitched high and mocking. "Julian, babe, I think the cleaning crew is here, but they are really early." She turned back to me, a smug smirk playing on her lips, her eyes cold and utterly dead of any human warmth. "Deliveries and staff go to the side door, sweetie. We just had the floors done, and we really do not want you tracking mud into the foyer." The betrayal was not in her words. I was a CEO. I was used to people underestimating me in negotiations until I pulled the rug out from under them. The true betrayal, the one that felt like a knife slipping between my ribs, was the booming laughter I heard erupting from the living room right behind her. I recognized that laugh instantly. It was my father. That was the moment the remaining warmth I had for my family evaporated. It was the absolute confirmation that in this family, I was not just the black sheep or the afterthought. I was the running joke. I stood taller, ignoring the burning ache in my shoulders. "I am not the cleaning guy," I said, my voice raspy but entirely steady. "I am Arthur, Julian's brother." Chloe's perfectly drawn eyebrows shot up in an exaggerated pantomime of surprise that did not reach her eyes for a single second. Oh my God. "Julian, it is your brother. The one you told me about." She stepped back, pulling the door wide open, but she deliberately did not move out of the way. She stood there like a gatekeeper, forcing me to squeeze past her. As I did, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical, condescending whisper. "Wow, I am so sorry. I just mean, look at you. I naturally assumed. You just look so incredibly hard-pressed. I bet you're here to ask for a handout." I gripped the handle of the gift bag tightly. I did not blow up. I did not yell. I just looked at her and walked inside. I thought the worst part of the evening was going to be dealing with her snobbery. I was so incredibly wrong. To truly understand the absolute madness of that moment in the foyer, you have to understand the deeply toxic history of my family. You have to understand the dynamic of the golden child and the spare. Julian was the miracle baby. My parents had him 4 years after I was born, and from the exact moment he took his first breath, the sun rose and set entirely on him. My father, Richard, was a mid-level manager at an insurance firm. He was obsessed with status, with looking like old money even though we were solidly middle class. When Julian came along, he was the chosen one to carry the family legacy. Julian was given absolutely everything. Private sports camps, the newest gaming consoles, a brand new car wrapped in a giant red bow on his 16th birthday. I, on the other hand, was treated like a roommate who was falling behind on rent. If Julian got a B on a test, my parents threw a dinner party to celebrate his genius. If I got straight A's, it was simply expected, barely warranting a nod from across the kitchen table. When Julian needed help, the checkbook flew open. The college fund was entirely drained to send him to a private university out of state, where he partied away his 20s. When it was my turn to go to college, my father sat me down in his study, poured himself a drink, and told me that taking out student loans would build my character. He told me that paying my own way was the only way I would learn the value of a dollar. So I did exactly that. I built a mountain of character. I worked 3 miserable jobs during college. I flipped burgers, I worked the graveyard shift at a gas station, and I taught myself complex coding and digital marketing in the dead of night using a cracked laptop. When my grandfather passed away, the inheritance he left behind went straight to Julian to buy a luxury condo, while I attended the funeral in a borrowed suit that did not even fit me. At 22, I started my company, Apex Innovations, from a damp, freezing basement apartment. I lived on instant ramen and sheer spite. I poured every ounce of my soul, every single penny I made, back into the business. I sacrificed my 20s. I missed holidays, I missed Thanksgiving dinners, I skipped vacations. I drove a beat-up car because I preferred to spend my money hiring the absolute best developers and strategists in the industry. Sarah, my chief operating officer, and I used to sit on the floor of that basement drafting business models on cheap whiteboards until the sun came up. Over 10 years, we ground our bones to dust, and we built an absolute empire. Apex Innovations became a powerhouse. My family knew I had some sort of little tech thing going on. They assumed I was a struggling freelancer, scraping by, designing cheap websites for local pizza shops. I never corrected them. At first, I kept quiet because I wanted to surprise them when I finally made it big. I wanted to see the pride in my father's eyes. But as the years went on, I realized they simply did not care enough to ask. They never once asked for the name of my company. They never once asked how my day was. Eventually, my silence became a test of their basic human decency, a test to see if they could love Arthur the struggling guy, not Arthur the walking ATM. And they failed that test miserably every single time we spoke. That brings us back to the driveway of Julian's new McMansion. As I had pulled up earlier, I took a good look at the neighborhood. It was one of those sprawling, aggressive homeowner association communities that smelled of fresh sod and severe arrogance. Julian's house was massive. It was the exact kind of real estate my parents adored, huge, showy, and entirely unnecessary for a guy who barely held down a mid-level marketing job. I parked my rusted Honda Civic right next to a gleaming Porsche. I recognized the Porsche. It belonged to Mr. Henderson, an old family friend who loved to boast about his stock portfolio at every gathering. I saw Mr. Henderson standing near the garage, holding a cigar. He looked at my car, looked at me stepping out of it, and actively turned his back to avoid greeting me. The blatant disrespect was baked into the very DNA of my family's social circle. I knew for a fact that my parents had heavily subsidized Julian's down payment for this house. They were constantly bailing him out, ensuring his life looked perfect from the outside. Meanwhile, I was the cautionary tale they whispered about. Walking into the house after Chloe's humiliating greeting felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The foyer was loud, echoing with the chatter of about 30 people. Family members, Julian's college buddies, and the snobby neighbors. The house was undeniable proof of forced wealth. High ceilings, marble floors, a chandelier that looked completely out of place. Julian came jogging out of the kitchen holding a craft beer. He looked healthy, perfectly tanned, wearing a crisp designer polo, the golden child in his natural habitat. "Arthur!" he shouted, giving me a half-hearted, one-armed bro hug. He pulled back quickly, his eyes immediately dropping to my faded hoodie. His smile faltered. "You made it. Man, you didn't have time to change? You look rough." "I came straight from work," I said calmly, forcing a polite smile. "Happy housewarming, Julian. The place is massive." "Yeah, isn't it?" He puffed out his chest, looking around proudly. "Got a killer deal. Dad really came through with the mortgage broker negotiations." "I am sure he did," I replied quietly. Julian wrapped his arm around Chloe, pulling her close. "So, you met Chloe at the door?" "We met," Chloe said, linking her arm through his and resting her head on his shoulder. "I almost sent him to the servants' quarters. Can you believe it? But honestly, Julian, you did not tell me your brother was struggling this much. We should really pack him some leftovers tonight." Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of her comment, my father, Richard, walked into the hallway. He was a tall man who carried himself like a Fortune 500 CEO, despite never rising above middle management. He held a crystal glass of expensive scotch. "Arthur." My father greeted me with a stiff nod. No hug, no handshake. He looked at my outfit with open, unfiltered disdain. "I specifically texted you to dress appropriately. We have people from the club here. It reflects poorly on your mother and me when you show up looking like a vagrant who wandered off the street." "Nice to see you too, Dad," I said, feeling that familiar, childish lump of rejection form in my throat. I pushed it down. I held out the gift bag toward Julian. "Here, for the new kitchen." Julian took the bag. It was heavy. Inside was a set of hand-forged Japanese kitchen knives I had purchased directly from an artisan during a business trip to Tokyo last month. They cost more than my Honda Civic. I had wrapped them in simple, unbleached brown paper because I appreciate the craftsmanship, not flashy packaging. Julian peeked inside, pulling back the brown paper. He frowned, looking genuinely confused. Knives? They are hand-forged Japanese steel, I began to explain. The artisan is a master who, Aunt Margaret, who had materialized behind my father, interrupted me. Are they second-hand, Arthur? The wrapping paper looks like something you pulled out of a recycling bin. Chloe peered into the bag and let out a tinkling, horribly condescending laugh. Oh, Arthur, it is completely okay. We know things are really tight for you right now. Honestly, it is the thought that counts. We can use them to open boxes in the garage or something. Julian, put them away before anyone sees that hideous packaging. I felt a sudden rush of heat in my chest. Chloe, those knives are worth more than… Arthur, stop. My father cut in, his voice cracking like a whip in the hallway. Do not get defensive. Chloe is being incredibly gracious about your cheap gift. Do not make a scene just because you feel embarrassed about your financial situation. I looked from my father to my brother. Julian would not even meet my eyes. He was too busy smiling apologetically at Chloe, as if my presence was a burden he had to manage. I am not embarrassed, I said, my voice hardening. I am trying to tell you what the gift actually is. We get it, my father said, taking a sip of his scotch and waving me off dismissively. You did what you could afford. Now go get yourself a blank water and try to blend into the background. Or maybe just stay in the kitchen. Let it go. You are making this awkward for everyone. Let it go. That was the family motto whenever I was being openly disrespected. I watched them turn their backs on me. Chloe whispered something in Julian's ear, and he chuckled, kissing her temple. My father patted Julian on the shoulder, beaming with absolute pride. They walked toward the living room, leaving me standing completely alone in the grand foyer. I took a slow, deep breath. I could have walked out right then. I could have gotten back into my car, driven to my penthouse, and completely erased them from my life. But as I stood there, I remembered an internal company memo I had skimmed just before leaving my office. It was a notification from my HR department about the new hires for the quarter. I had not looked at the names closely at the time, but as I watched Chloe saunter into the living room, acting like royalty, a realization hit me like a freight train. I remembered seeing a face on that HR memo. A face with perfectly styled hair and a manufactured smile. Chloe. I reached into my pocket and gripped my phone. A slow, absolute calm washed over me, completely erasing my exhaustion. They wanted to play games about status. They wanted to humiliate me over money. But they had forgotten one fundamental rule of the world. The person who signs the paychecks is the only one who truly holds the power. I decided right then and there. I was not going to leave. I was going to watch this entire charade burn to the ground. I walked into the massive living room, grabbing a glass of tap water from the kitchen island on my way. The room was packed with people trying entirely too hard to look important. I stood quietly near the heavy stone fireplace, leaning against the wall, and simply observed. Chloe was holding court in the center of the room. She was a predator in a designer dress, floating from group to group, dominating every single conversation. I watched her corner Aunt Margaret, asking pointed, invasive questions about the square footage of Margaret's vacation home, clearly calculating the woman's net worth in real time. I watched her actively ignore anyone she deemed unimportant. But her absolute favorite target was me. She seemed to possess a radar for vulnerability, and she had incorrectly identified me as the weakest link in the room, the designated punching bag she could use to elevate her own status in front of my family. Eventually, she dragged Julian over to where I was standing. She was flanked by a couple of her friends, including Sophie, a woman who looked at me with the exact same expression you would give a piece of trash stuck to your shoe, and Liam, one of Julian's frat brothers. So, Arthur, Chloe announced. her voice deliberately loud enough to make the surrounding guests stop and listen. "Julian tells me you are still single. And still freelancing. I am focused on my career right now," I said neutrally, taking a sip of my water. Chloe giggled, a sharp, grating sound. "Right? Your career. Freelancing is just so brave. I mean, not knowing where your next paycheck is coming from, constantly hustling for pennies. I would absolutely die of anxiety. But I guess you are just used to living at the bottom of the barrel." Sophie snickered, covering her mouth. Liam shook his head, looking at me with pure pity. Julian shifted uncomfortably on his feet but remained entirely silent. He swirled his beer, refusing to defend his own brother. "I manage just fine," I said, keeping my gaze locked on Chloe. "Well, you should really take some notes from me," Chloe said, puffing out her chest and tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I just landed a massive position. A real career, Arthur. Not just gig work. It comes with an insane salary, full benefits, and an incredible trajectory." "Oh," I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Where at?" "Apex Innovations," she announced, beaming with arrogant pride. "It is the hottest tech and digital agency in the entire country. We handle accounts for massive global corporations. The hiring process was absolutely brutal. They only let the absolute elite in." My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest. "We." She used the word "we." I knew for a fact the new hire orientation was this past Monday. She had been at my company for exactly 3 days. "Is that so?" I asked softly. "Oh, absolutely," Chloe continued, her voice rising as she realized she had captivated the room. My father drifted over, standing next to Julian, looking incredibly pleased that his future daughter-in-law was such a high roller. "The culture there is incredibly exclusive," Chloe lied, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of her own fabrication. "High stakes, high reward. My starting salary is easily triple what you have made in the last 5 years combined, Arthur." "That sounds very impressive," my father chimed in, clapping a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. "See, Arthur? That is what real ambition looks like. Chloe is going places. You could learn a thing or two about work ethic from her." I looked at my father. "I am sure I could, Dad." Chloe was not done. She was drunk on the attention. "I am actually practically best friends with the CEO," she boasted, waving her champagne flute around. "He is this terrifying, powerful guy, but he took an immediate shine to me. He said I have the exact kind of killer instinct he respects. We are actually doing a private one-on-one lunch next week to discuss my fast-track promotion to senior management." I almost choked on my water. The CEO. Me. I had been in Tokyo the week before, and I had been locked in a high-security boardroom in New York for the last 3 days. I had never laid eyes on Chloe in my entire life until she opened the front door 2 hours ago. "He sounds very discerning," I managed to say, keeping my face entirely blank. "Oh, he is ruthless," Chloe nodded seriously, playing the part of the seasoned corporate veteran. "He absolutely hates incompetence. He fires people on the spot if they do not present themselves flawlessly. Honestly, Arthur, if you walked into our corporate lobby looking like that," she gestured wildly at my hoodie and jeans, "our security team would tackle you to the floor before you even got near the elevators." Sophie laughed out loud. Liam chuckled. Even my father cracked a wide smile. "Well," my father said, looking at me with total disappointment, "at least someone in Julian's life is making something of themselves. Good for you, Chloe. Julian, you picked an absolute winner." "I try, Richard," Chloe simpered, leaning into my father's praise. She turned back to me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "Maybe once my promotion is official next week, I can pull some strings and see if there is an opening in the mailroom for you, Arthur. Or maybe on the janitorial staff. We always need people to empty the trash bins after hours." The room went dead quiet for a split second. It was a vicious, calculated insult. It was a step too far, even for a family that hated me. But then Julian laughed. It was a nervous, coerced laugh, but it was a laugh. "Yeah, Julian said, looking at me. Maybe you can help him out, babe. Lord knows he needs it. I looked at my brother, the boy I used to protect from neighborhood bullies. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement with the janitor comment. And finally, I looked at Chloe, who was grinning like she had just won the lottery, completely oblivious to the fact that she was currently mocking the man who owned her entire professional existence. You know, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of the quiet, submissive son. I would absolutely love to hear more about your specific role at Apex, especially about this intimate lunch with the CEO. Oh, honey, she sneered, rolling her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. You would not understand the corporate lingo even if I dumbed it down for you. Let's just stick to topics you can grasp. How is that rusted Honda running? Still barely passing inspection. The urge to scream was right there, sitting at the back of my throat. But I did not storm off. Storming off implies a loss of emotional control. And if there was one thing building an empire from a basement had taught me, it was that emotion is a massive liability in a hostile negotiation. And this was no longer a family party. This was a hostile corporate takedown. I need to use the restroom, I said, my voice eerily calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic adrenaline pumping through my veins. Down the hall, second door on the left, Julian muttered, refusing to look at me. He was too busy refilling Chloe's glass. And please do not use the master bath, Chloe called out loudly after me. I really do not want you touching my expensive skincare products with those hands. Another ripple of cruel laughter followed me down the hallway. I kept walking, my spine rigid, my face locked into a mask of stone. I stepped into the guest bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. I thought the worst was over when she mocked my clothes. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm had not even started yet. The silence inside the guest bathroom was instant and heavy. I leaned back against the solid wood door, closing my eyes for just a second. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The physical exhaustion was still there. The dark circles, the messy hair, the stained shirt underneath my hoodie. But the dull, aching resignation in my eyes was entirely gone. It was replaced by the sharp, steely glint I usually reserved for aggressive corporate takeovers and hostile board meetings. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I unlocked the screen and immediately bypassed my standard apps, navigating straight to the Apex Innovations internal administrative directory. It is a highly secure, encrypted application accessible only to C-suite executives. I bypassed the standard login using my biometric passkey, the master key to the entire kingdom. I tapped the search bar and typed in her last name. One result populated immediately. Chloe Miller. Position, Junior Account Temp Department, Regional Sales. Status, 90-day probationary period. Start date, Monday, 3 days ago. I tapped heavily on her digital profile, pulling up her internal file. Her resume was attached. I scanned it quickly, my eyes darting over the text. It was heavily embellished, to put it politely. She claimed 5 years of senior management experience at a marketing firm that I knew for an absolute fact had gone bankrupt and liquidated 3 years ago. She listed advanced corporate negotiation as her primary skill. But the real goldmine was the internal notes left by the HR department and her direct manager. Note 1. Candidate is enthusiastic but lacks basic technical proficiency. Hiring on a strict trial basis due to an external referral. Note 2. Added yesterday employee showed up 40 minutes late. Displayed aggressive behavior toward the administrative staff when asked to wear a visitor badge. Monitor very closely for cultural fit. Risk of termination high. Cultural fit. I whispered to the empty bathroom, a cold smile touching my lips. In Apex corporate terms, monitor for cultural fit was HR code for do not let this person become a toxic liability. Prepare to fire them. She had lied about her senior position. She had lied about her massive salary. But the lie about the private lunch? The public claim that she was being personally mentored for senior management by the CEO? That was the exact leverage I needed. It was no longer just a personal, petty family insult. It was a gross misrepresentation of company leadership. It was a fireable offense. It was grounds for a corporate lawsuit. I did not waste another second. I opened my secure email client and drafted an urgent, priority-flagged message to David, my vice president of sales, and the man who technically oversaw Chloe's department. David was a ruthless, no-nonsense executive who had been with me since the early days. Subject: urgent, immediate action required regarding new hire, Chloe Miller. David, I am currently at a personal family event and have unfortunately just crossed paths with your new probationary hire, Chloe Miller. She is currently standing in a room full of people, publicly representing herself as a senior executive. She is explicitly claiming that she and I have a standing private lunch appointment next week to discuss her promotion to management. She is using the Apex name to leverage social standing and making false claims about company operations. Confirm her actual schedule for the week. Have HR pull her termination paperwork immediately. Also, keep your phone on you. I will need you on an active call in exactly 10 minutes. Arthur. I hit send. The email vanished into the server. Then I opened my calendar application. I took a screenshot of my itinerary from the past 2 weeks. Tokyo meetings from dawn until midnight. The Red Point merger in New York. I had the trap fully set. I had the bait perfectly placed. Now I just needed her to walk blindly into it in front of my entire family. I washed my hands, scrubbing them with the expensive lavender soap until my skin was pink. I splashed freezing cold water on my face, patting it dry with a plush guest towel. I deliberately did not try to fix my hair. I did not try to smooth out my faded hoodie. Let them look at the struggling, pathetic brother. Let them soak in their false superiority. It was going to make the impending execution that much more devastating. When I walked back out into the living room, the dynamic of the party had shifted again. The music was louder. Chloe was now sitting on the massive white leather sofa, her designer shoes kicked off, her legs tucked under her. She looked every inch the mistress of the manor, holding court with a fresh glass of champagne. My father was sitting in an armchair directly across from her, looking at her with an expression of deep reverence and respect, an expression he had never, not once in 32 years, directed at me. Julian was perched on the arm of the sofa, his hand resting possessively on Chloe's shoulder. They looked like a perfect, successful, elite family, and I was the dirt tracked onto their expensive rug. I walked over, deliberately stepping directly into the center of their circle, blocking the television screen. Back so soon? Chloe quipped, not even bothering to look up from her phone. I was worried you got lost. A house this size is a lot bigger than the cramped apartments you are used to. I found my way just fine, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the music. I did not sit down. Standing gave me the physical and psychological high ground, even if they were entirely too arrogant to realize it yet. I was actually thinking about what you said earlier, Chloe, about Apex Innovations. Chloe's head snapped up. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows narrowed. What about it? I am just genuinely impressed, I said, injecting a tone of innocent curiosity into my voice. It is a notoriously tough industry. Corporate marketing at that level requires a massive amount of integrity. It requires killer instinct, Chloe corrected me, her lip curling into a sneer. Something you clearly completely lack, Arthur. That is exactly why I am on the fast track to the top and you are, well, you, right? The fast track. I nodded slowly, putting my hands in the pockets of my hoodie. You mentioned earlier that the CEO took a real shine to you. What is he actually like? I have read a few articles in the financial trades, but they say he is notoriously private and never interacts with junior staff. Chloe took a slow sip of her champagne, actively relishing the attention. The entire circle of guests, my dad, Julian, Liam, Sophie, all leaned in, hanging on her every word. He is very private, Chloe said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. playing the insider. But with me, he really opened up. We had this incredible heart-to-heart in his corner office on Tuesday afternoon. He told me he is so incredibly tired of the yes-men surrounding him on the executive board. He needs someone fresh, someone with real vision. He actually asked me for my strategic advice on the Kyoto account. The room murmured with deep appreciation. "Wow," Julian said, beaming down at her. "Babe, that is massive. The Kyoto account." I felt a cold, sharp smile tugging at the absolute corner of my mouth. I had her. She had stepped directly onto the landmine. "The Kyoto account?" I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, losing the innocent act. "That sounds absolutely fascinating, Chloe. What kind of client is it?" "Tech fashion." Chloe waved her hand dismissively, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh light of the obnoxious crystal chandelier above us. "It is high-end tech robotics. Multi-billion-dollar stuff. It is strictly confidential, obviously. You would not know the corporate clients even if I spelled their names out for you on a whiteboard." "Obviously," I said, keeping my voice incredibly even. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost impressive. "I deal with multi-billion-dollar tech robotics firms on a weekly basis. I know their executives, I know their quarterly margins, and I know for a fact that none of them would ever trust a junior probationary temp with their confidential product roadmaps. It is just strange." "What is strange?" Chloe snapped, her tone dripping with sudden, venomous irritation. She did not like being questioned by the man she had just publicly designated as the family loser. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "Well," I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket and looking at the screen casually, as if I were checking the evening weather forecast. "I follow the corporate marketing industry pretty closely. It is a hobby of mine, and I know for an absolute fact that Apex Innovations does not have a Kyoto account. Their Asian operations are exclusively based out of Tokyo and Seoul. They actually closed the Kyoto satellite office 4 years ago before their massive internal restructuring. It was all over the financial news." The silence that followed my words was sharp, immediate, and incredibly heavy. The smug, superior smile on Chloe's face faltered for a fraction of a second. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing slightly like a fish pulled out of water. She was searching for a lifeline, a way to spin the web of lies she had tangled herself in. "What would you know about it?" she spat, her face flushing a blotchy, furious pink beneath her expensive foundation. "You probably read that on some outdated tech blog while you were waiting in line at Walmart. I am on the inside, Arthur. I am the one attending the high-level meetings. I know exactly what is happening in the boardroom." "And the CEO?" I pressed forward, completely ignoring her pathetic insult. I took a single, deliberate step closer to the white leather sofa. I wanted her to feel the physical pressure of the conversation shifting. "You explicitly stated to everyone in this room that you met him on Tuesday afternoon for a heart-to-heart in his corner office." "Yes," Chloe shouted, her carefully crafted composure completely cracking under the pressure. "Why are you aggressively interrogating me in my own home? Are you seriously that jealous of my salary? Are you that desperate to tear me down because you are a complete failure who cannot even afford a decent haircut?" "It is just that on Tuesday," I said, scrolling through my phone and holding it up slightly. The major financial trade news reported that the CEO of Apex Innovations was actually in New York. He was heavily occupied with finalizing the massive corporate acquisition of Redpoint Analytics. In fact, there are high-resolution photos of him ringing the closing bell on Wall Street at the exact time you claim you were sitting in his office. I locked eyes with her, letting the cold, heavy reality of my words sink into the silent room. "So, I am just a little confused about how he was deeply discussing corporate strategy with you in his office, while he was simultaneously signing legally binding documents 300 miles away. Unless, of course, your new best friend has a clone." Chloe scrambled. She physically recoiled, jumping to her feet and nearly knocking over her crystal champagne glass in the process. "You do not know what you are talking about." He flew back. He took a private corporate jet just to meet with the senior team, He took a private jet in the middle of a multimillion-dollar merger for a casual lunch with a junior hire? I asked softly, letting the absolute absurdity of her lie hang in the air for everyone to examine. I am not a junior hire, Chloe screamed. The sophisticated, elite career woman vanished instantly into thin air. In her place stood a petulant, cornered bully who realized she was rapidly losing control of her captivated audience. She turned frantically to my brother, her hands shaking. Julian, are you really going to stand there and let your pathetic brother speak to me like this? He is calling me a liar in front of all of our friends. Julian jumped off the arm of the sofa, his face burning red with deep embarrassment and sudden, explosive anger. But that anger was not directed at the woman screaming blatant, easily disprovable lies in his living room. As always, the anger was directed squarely at me, the designated scapegoat. Arthur, enough! Julian barked, stepping aggressively between me and Chloe, puffing out his chest in a show of false dominance. What the hell is wrong with you? You come into my house looking like absolute trash. You hand me a box of cheap knives, and now you are trying to humiliate my fiancée in front of my guests? Because what? You are bitter? You are jealous she has a real career, a massive salary, and you are a broke loser. I am not jealous, Julian, I said, my voice rock steady, even though it physically hurt to see my own brother defend a manipulative stranger so blindly. I am trying to warn you. She is lying directly to your face. She is lying about her job. She is lying about her position. And she is lying about who she actually is. Stop it right now. My father, Richard, stood up from his armchair. His heavy footsteps echoed aggressively on the hardwood floor as he loomed over me, his face twisted in absolute, unfiltered disgust. I knew I should not have invited you, my father snarled, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at my chest. You always do this. You have always done this. You cannot stand to see anyone else in this family succeed. Julian is doing incredibly well. He has a beautiful piece of real estate, a successful fiancé, and you just want to drag them down to your miserable level. Chloe has been nothing but gracious to you today, and you attack her out of pure spite. She called me a beggar, Dad, I said, gesturing down to my faded clothes. She tried to send me to the service entrance to use the servant's door. You call that gracious? You call that acceptable behavior? She was joking, my father yelled, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. It was a harmless joke. God, you were so incredibly sensitive. We drained the entire college fund to make sure Julian had a solid start in life, and you have held a grudge ever since. No wonder you cannot hold down a real job. No wonder you are stuck in whatever dead-end life you are living. He is completely right, Chloe chimed in from safely behind Julian's back. She peeked out with a smug, teary-eyed expression, putting on the theatrical performance of a lifetime. She wiped a completely fake tear from her cheek, her voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. I tried to be nice, Julian. I really tried to welcome him. But he is just deeply toxic. He has toxic, negative energy. I do not want him in my house anymore. You heard her, Julian said, aggressively pointing toward the heavy front door. Get your coat and get out, Arthur. Seriously, leave. You are ruining my housewarming party. Right at that exact second, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was the priority email reply from David, my vice president of sales. Arthur, are you serious? Chloe Miller started Monday. She is an entry-level temp in regional sales. She is on a strict 90-day probation. I am looking at her timesheet right now. She clocked out early twice this week without authorization. She has zero clearance to speak on behalf of the company, let alone discuss the Kyoto account. What exactly is she saying? This is a massive liability. Do you want me to call building security? Or are you handling this personally? I read the text slowly. I absorbed the absolute power it gave me. Then, I looked up at my brother, who was still pointing angrily at the door. I looked at my father, who was shaking his head in profound disappointment, loudly mourning the fact that I was his son. I thought the absolute worst part of my life was growing up feeling invisible in my own home. I was so incredibly wrong. The worst part was realizing I had spent 32 years desperately craving the approval of people who were fundamentally shallow, materialistic, and worthless. "I will leave," I said, raising a single hand to halt their collective screaming. "But before I walk out that door, I think there is one very important phone call we need to make." "No more games, Arthur," Julian snapped, taking a threatening step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Just get out before I physically throw you out." "Chloe," I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the heavy, hostile noise of the room. I looked directly over Julian's shoulder, pinning her with a dead, icy stare that I usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. "If you are practically best friends with the CEO of Apex Innovations, why do you not call him right now? Pull out your phone, put him on speaker, and let us clear up this little misunderstanding. Introduce me to your incredible mentor." Chloe froze entirely. The fake tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by a stark, genuine panic. She darted her gaze around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. The surrounding guests, including Sophie, Liam, and Mr. Henderson, were all watching intently now. The music had been turned down by someone, and you could hear a pin drop. They smelled the blood in the water. "I cannot do that," she stammered, crossing her arms defensively, her knuckles turning white. "It is the weekend. He is an incredibly busy man. I strictly respect his personal boundaries. I am not going to bother him with petty family drama." "That is funny," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Julian to back up slightly to maintain his balance. "Because you just spent the last 20 minutes bragging to a room full of strangers about how he took a deeply personal shine to you. Surely a man who values your strategic vision so highly would take a quick weekend phone call from his star protege." "She is bluffing, Julian," Chloe shrieked, clutching his arm with her manicured claws, her voice hitting a hysterical pitch. "Make him leave. He is completely crazy. He is trying to ruin my life." "I am not bluffing," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, suffocating quiet of the living room. "In fact, I have the Apex corporate directory right here on my phone." I turned the screen of my phone around so the entire room could clearly see the glowing blue interface of the highly restricted company app. "This is the live organizational chart for the entire corporation," I explained, tapping the screen to demonstrate its functionality. "Right up here at the very top is the executive board. Below that are the vice presidents. Down here are the senior regional managers." I kept scrolling, my thumb flicking rapidly across the glass, watching their eyes follow the movement. "And if we scroll all the way down past the actual executives, past the mid-level managers, past the administrative assistants, all the way down into the probationary temp pool. Here we go. Chloe Miller. Junior account temp salary bracket is entry level." The room went completely, devastatingly silent. I saw Sophie lean in slightly, squinting to read the precise text on my glowing screen. "That is an old list," Chloe yelled, her voice cracking in pure, unadulterated panic. Her face was a mask of sheer terror now. "The internal system has not updated yet. I was given a verbal promotion yesterday by the regional director. A verbal promotion to the executive board after exactly 3 days of employment?" I asked, my tone dripping with absolute, lethal sarcasm. "Chloe, that is not how Fortune 500 corporations work. That is not how human resources operates. And that is definitely not how my company works." "Your company?" My father barked a harsh, mocking laugh, taking a step toward me. "Arthur, have you completely lost your mind? Are you having a mental breakdown? Now you are claiming you work there too, as what the janitor Chloe joked about." "No, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that carried infinitely more weight than any of their loud screaming. "I do not just work there." I looked directly at Chloe. She had gone completely pale. The blood had entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and terrified. She was staring at me, truly looking at me for the very first time. She was looking at the confident, unbothered way I held my shoulders. She was looking at the expensive phone in my hand, recognizing the proprietary administrative software that only top-level executives were allowed to install on their devices. "You bragged about your massive career," I said to her, the silence in the room hanging thick and heavy like a physical weight. "You bragged about the exclusive corporate culture. You bragged about the CEO firing people on the spot for incompetence." I took one more step closer. Julian tried to block me again, but he faltered, entirely confused by the sudden, massive shift in the power dynamic of the room. He looked from me to Chloe, deeply unsure of what was actually happening. "You forgot one massive, fatal thing when you were doing your shallow research to build this fake persona, Chloe," I said smoothly. "You never checked to see who actually founded Apex Innovations." "It is a holding company," Chloe stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the syllables. "It is owned by a massive investment group. It is owned by VM Holdings." "I am VM Holdings," I corrected her, my words landing like heavy stones dropped into a perfectly still pond. "VM stands for Arthur Vance Miller." I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Her knees actually buckled slightly, forcing her to lean heavily against the arm of the leather sofa to keep from collapsing onto the floor. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically from side to side. "No, that is entirely impossible. You drive a rusted Honda. You look like this. You look like you buy your clothes at a thrift store." "I drive a Honda because I pour my revenue into paying my developers top salary and securing top-tier talent," I said calmly. "And I look like this because I just spent 3 exhausting days closing the Redpoint Analytics merger that you read about in the news. The exact merger I negotiated. The exact merger I signed." "Bullshit," Julian whispered. He looked frantically from me to Chloe, desperate for her to deny it. "Arthur, stop lying. Dad, tell him to stop lying. He is faking it," Chloe screamed. The sheer desperation in her voice completely betrayed her. She lunged forward, trying to aggressively grab my phone out of my hand. "Give me that. You faked that app. You paid someone to build a fake app. You are a fraud." I pulled the phone back easily, stepping out of her reach with practiced ease. "I did not fake this." I pressed the call button on David's contact file. I put the phone on speaker and held it up high enough for the entire room to hear. The line rang twice. The sound echoed painfully in the tension-filled living room. "Arthur." David's voice boomed from the speaker, crisp, authoritative, and utterly professional. "I got your email. I am looking at Miller's digital file right now. Why the hell is a junior temp claiming executive status? Do you want me to terminate her building access immediately? Because if she is misrepresenting company operations at a public event, that is a direct violation of Clause 4 in her non-disclosure contract. Our corporate lawyer is already drafting the paperwork for the lawsuit." Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Julian's jaw physically dropped. My father's crystal glass of scotch slipped from his numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor and shattering into 100 pieces. The silence that followed David's voice was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the oxygen right out of the room. The only sound was the jagged crunch of broken glass under my father's expensive shoe as he shifted his weight, staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a live explosive. "I need a verbal confirmation, Arthur," David continued, his voice tinny but unmistakable. "Is Miller causing a public scene? I can have local security there in 20 minutes. I did not look at the phone. I kept my eyes locked onto Chloe. The arrogance, the sneer, the pity. It was all completely gone, replaced by raw, naked ruin. "No, David," I said calmly. "Security will not be necessary." Chloe was just finishing up a rather loud presentation to my family about how she practically runs Apex. I think she is done talking now. My phone buzzed again, a banner notification dropping down from the top of the screen. I glanced at it. It was a direct message on LinkedIn from Sophie, the exact same friend who had been mocking my clothes 5 minutes ago. "Hey Arthur, So crazy we just met. I am actually looking to transition into tech sales. Would love to grab a coffee and pick your brain about opportunities at Apex. I swiped the notification away in disgust. I thought the worst part of wealth was dealing with fake corporate friends. I was so incredibly wrong. The worst part was watching the people you grew up with reveal exactly how little they valued loyalty, and how quickly they would betray each other for a paycheck. Chloe, Julian whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward the woman he was supposed to marry. His voice was hollow, stripped of all the arrogant bravado he had displayed just moments ago. Chloe recoiled from him, bursting into genuine, hysterical tears. Her heavy, expensive makeup began to run down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Julian, please, you have to understand. It was just a little white lie. I just wanted to impress your father. Everyone exaggerates their resume. It is not a big deal. It is just corporate politics. Julian took a massive step back, his face twisting from deep confusion into absolute, pure disgust. But the truly tragic reality was, he was not disgusted because she had maliciously attacked and humiliated his own brother. He was disgusted because she had embarrassed him in front of his wealthy neighbors and his fraternity brothers. She had made him look like a gullible, easily manipulated fool. You lied to me, Julian said, his voice cracking. You told me you were pulling in 6 figures. You told me you could cover half the mortgage on this house. You told me your family was wealthy. You tried to get my brother fired from his own company. I didn't know. Chloe shrieked, turning her vitriol back onto me. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger at my chest. How was I supposed to know? Look at him. He looks like a homeless bum. He drives a piece of junk. He completely tricked me. He set me up to look stupid. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that scraped the back of my throat. I did not trick you, Chloe. I simply stood here and existed. You filled in the blanks with your own extreme prejudice. You saw a faded jacket and assumed failure. You saw a quiet man and assumed weakness. That is not on me. That is entirely on you. I lifted the phone back to my mouth. David, I am still here. I hear you, boss, David replied, waiting for the final word. Terminate Chloe Miller's contract immediately, I ordered, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. Effective this exact second. Mark her file as gross misconduct and misrepresentation of corporate authority. Cancel her health benefits, revoke her building badge, and freeze her company email. And David, have the legal team send a cease and desist tomorrow morning. If I hear she has used the Apex brand to leverage so much as a free coffee, I want her sued into absolute bankruptcy. Understood, David said. It is done. Have a good night, Arthur. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. No, Chloe screamed, dropping to her knees on the expensive rug, completely abandoning whatever dignity she had left. You cannot do this. You cannot fire me on a Saturday. I will sue you. My dad has a lawyer. You are on a probationary period, Chloe, I stated coldly, looking down at her pathetic display. I can legally fire you for wearing the wrong color shoes to the office. But firing you for publicly humiliating the CEO and breaching a confidentiality contract, that is a legal slam dunk. Save your dad's money. You are going to need it to pay your rent next month. Chloe looked frantically around the room, desperate for a single ally. She looked at Sophie, but Sophie was suddenly fascinated by the ceiling. She looked at Liam, who actively turned his back and started checking his phone. Finally, she looked at my father. Richard, please, she sobbed, holding her hands up in a pleading gesture. You know me. You know I am a good person. Please talk to him. My father looked at Chloe. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and looked at me. For the first time in 32 years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He looked at the son he had dismissed, mocked, and financially abandoned. He realized he was standing in the presence of a man who could buy and sell his entire life's work 10 times over before lunch. Chloe, my father said, his voice trembling slightly, entirely lacking his usual booming authority. "I think you need to leave my son's house," Chloe gasped, a horrible, ragged sound. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her designer purse from the sofa. She looked at Julian one last time, waiting for him to defend her. Julian just pointed sharply at the door. Colin, Julian's friend who had driven Chloe to the party, silently walked over and opened the heavy front door, waiting to escort her out. As she walked past me, Chloe stopped. Her face was twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are a monster," she hissed under her breath. "You are going to die completely alone with all your money. Better than dying a pathetic fraud," I replied smoothly, not blinking. She stormed out. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent house. Within seconds, the guests began awkwardly murmuring their excuses. Aunt Margaret scurried toward the door, avoiding my gaze entirely. Mr. Henderson practically ran to his Porsche. The house emptied out in less than 3 minutes, leaving only me, Julian, and my parents standing in the wreckage of the living room. My father cleared his throat. He forced a wide, completely unnatural smile onto his face and took a cautious step toward me. "Arthur, my boy," my father said, his voice dripping with sudden, sickening affection. "I had absolutely no idea. VM Holdings. My God, you are a CEO. You are a titan. Your mother and I are so incredibly proud of you." I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the greedy gleam in his eyes. He was not looking at his son. He was looking at a walking college fund, a retirement plan, a shiny new trophy he could brag about at the country club. He was looking at the inheritance he felt he was somehow owed. "Do not," I said, my voice freezing the air between us. "Do not try to claim my success now. You did not build this. You did not support this. You let me eat ramen in a freezing basement while you bought Julian a luxury condo. You laughed at my clothes tonight because you thought I was poor. You failed the test, Dad." I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. "Arthur, wait," Julian called out, his voice desperate. "Are we okay? We are brothers, right?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I looked at the boy I used to protect. "Enjoy the knives, Julian. Cut something out of your life that is actually holding you back." I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them completely behind. I got into my rusted Honda Civic, turned the key, and smiled as the old engine roared to life. 6 months later, the air in my new penthouse was completely silent, save for the gentle hum of the central climate control system. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a mug of premium coffee, looking down at the sprawling city skyline below. The penthouse was stunning. Private elevator access, marble counters, and enough physical space to finally breathe. I had bought it the week after the disastrous housewarming party. I walked into Elaine's real estate office, viewed the property once, and handed her a cashier's check for the full amount in cash. My company, Apex Innovations, had officially doubled its quarterly revenue following the successful Redpoint merger. Sarah, my chief operating officer and the only person who had stood by me when we had absolutely nothing, was thriving in her new role as president. My life was finally peaceful. But toxic family has a funny way of trying to drag you back into the mud the exact moment they realize you are standing on solid gold. My cell phone rang on the kitchen island. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Julian. I had blocked my parents entirely after they tried to show up at my corporate headquarters demanding a meeting, but I had left Julian unblocked, mostly out of morbid curiosity. I answered, putting him on speakerphone while I reviewed a legal document. "Arthur speaking." "Arthur." Julian's voice came through the speaker. He sounded completely broken. The arrogant golden child was entirely gone. "Please do not hang up. I have exactly 2 minutes before a board meeting, Julian. What do you want?" I could hear him holding back a sob. "I am losing the house, Arthur. The bank is foreclosing next month. Chloe destroyed my credit before the breakup, and Mom and Dad are in serious trouble." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling absolutely nothing. Trouble? They mortgaged their own house to help pay for my lifestyle, Julian confessed, the pathetic words tumbling out in a rush. Dad liquidated his 401k to buy that Porsche to keep up appearances with Mr. Henderson and the neighbors. Now the insurance firm downsized his department. He was forced into early retirement. They have nothing, Arthur. They are completely underwater. They are going to lose their house. We need a loan. Please, just write us a check. You make that kind of money in a single day. I stood there, looking out over the city. I felt a profound sense of sadness for the absolute waste of their lives, but absolutely zero guilt. They had spent their entire lives worshipping the false god of status, pouring their wealth into a son who refused to work for anything. The house of cards had finally collapsed, exactly as I always knew it would. They had prioritized vanity over building a real legacy. Julian, I said, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. I am not a bank, and I am certainly not your personal financial bailout plan. We are your family, he cried desperately. You cannot just let Mom and Dad go bankrupt. What about my future? Your future is your responsibility, I replied firmly. I will not write you a check. I will not hand you a single dollar. But, because I am not a monster, I will offer you a lifeline. Julian gasped, a sudden spark of greedy hope returning to his voice. Anything. Name it. I have an opening in the logistics warehouse at Apex, I said calmly. It is intense manual labor. Packing boxes, moving heavy inventory. Pays minimum wage. There are no corporate benefits, and you will clock in at 6 in the morning sharp, every single day. If you want to learn the value of a dollar, the exact same way Dad told me to learn it when he refused to pay for my college fund, the job is yours. But that is the only help you will ever get from me. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. The heavy, crushing weight of reality was finally settling onto his pampered shoulders. I cannot pack boxes, Julian whispered, his toxic pride still somehow intact despite his total financial ruin. What would my friends think? Then I guess you have a lot of packing to do at your own house before the bank takes it, I said. Goodbye, Julian. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. That afternoon, I drove my 2014 Honda Civic down to a local charity center and completely donated it, tossing the keys to a young kid who desperately needed a reliable ride to get to his community college classes. The long, exhausting chapter of Arthur, the struggling spare, was officially closed forever. I walked into the massive glass lobby of Apex Innovations. The security guard nodded respectfully. My employees smiled warmly as I walked past. I wasn't just a survivor of a deeply toxic family anymore. I was a man who had built his own table when he was violently denied a seat at theirs. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. If there is one profound thing my journey has taught me, it is that your worth is never determined by the people who blindly refuse to see your true value. True power is not about screaming, throwing tantrums, or demanding unearned respect. True power is walking away in complete silence, building your own empire, and letting your massive success be the only noise they ever hear. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic family members warm. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut ties and walk away to save your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.